On the night of June 18th, 2014, in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Jacksonville, Florida, peace was shattered. The Matthews Street was like many others, tree-lined, manicured lawns, porch lights gently glowing in the dusk. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, where families raised their children, neighbors waved from their driveways, and the sound of laughter echoed on summer evenings. But that night, silence fell like a heavy curtain. At approximately 8:37 p.m., a 911 call was made by a passerby who reported hearing what sounded like gunshots from inside a single-story ranch-style home. That home belonged to Harold Matthews, a 66-year-old retired police officer, father, grandfather, and according to everyone who knew him, a pillar of the community. Officers arrived within minutes. The scene inside was grim. Harold was found slumped in his armchair, a book still clutched loosely in his hand. 2 bullet wounds in his chest told the story before anyone said a word. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no stolen valuables. To the untrained eye, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. But to the detectives on scene, something felt off. The room was too orderly. There were no signs of struggle, no sign that Harold had tried to defend himself. And most importantly, there was a sense of familiarity in how the killer had moved. Quiet, calculated, precise. The front door had been locked from the inside. No fingerprints were found on the gun that lay on the floor, staged in a way that suggested suicide. But Harold's background, a decorated police officer with decades of experience, made that theory hard to believe. Something darker had happened here, and the truth would take investigators deep into a web of secrets, betrayal, and forbidden desires. This wasn't just a murder. This was a tragedy born from years of silence, from the kind of love no one talks about, and the kind of anger that only brews when family turns against itself. The truth, as detectives would soon discover, was far more horrifying than anything they'd imagined, and it all began inside this quiet home, on a night no one would ever forget. To anyone on the outside looking in, the Matthews family was picture perfect. Jennifer Matthews, 35 years old, was the very image of a devoted wife and loving mother. The kind of woman who always smiled at neighbors, baked cookies for PTA meetings, and kept the household running with clockwork precision. Her mornings began with school runs and breakfast routines. Afternoons were for grocery trips, laundry, helping with homework. She wasn't flashy or dramatic. She was grounded, steady, reliable. Her husband, Mark Matthews, was a successful real estate agent in Jacksonville. Charming, well-dressed, and always on the go. He had a gift with people, knew how to close a deal, knew how to sell a dream. He was ambitious, always chasing the next big property, the next client, the next sale. But success came with a price. Mark worked long hours, networking events, weekend showings, dinners with clients. He was rarely home for more than a few hours at a time. And while he provided well for his family emotionally, he was a ghost, distant, distracted. Then there was Harold Matthews, Mark's father, a stoic man shaped by decades in law enforcement. He had served his city with honor, retiring after a long career in the Jacksonville Police Department. He was respected, trusted. But behind that steely exterior was a man who had suffered a devastating loss. In 2008, Harold's wife, Mark's mother, passed away after a long battle with cancer. Her death shattered Harold in ways no one expected. The strong, silent officer became withdrawn, hollow. He didn't cry, he didn't talk. But everyone could see the grief in his eyes. After the funeral, Harold started spending more time at Mark and Jennifer's home. At first, it made sense. He needed family, a warm meal, the laughter of grandchildren. a place that didn't feel so unbearably quiet, and Jennifer welcomed him in with compassion, with care. She cooked his favorite meals, sat with him during quiet evenings, listened to stories about the past, about his wife, his career, his regrets. Where Mark was absent, Harold was present. And where Harold felt alone, Jennifer offered comfort. What began as support slowly evolved into something else. Neither of them knew it at the time, or maybe they did, and just didn't want to admit it. But something was forming in the silence between them. Something they both felt, but never said out loud. Not yet. The Matthews family, Tadam on the surface, was a model of stability. But under that surface, something was stirring, something forbidden, something dangerous, something that, in time, would destroy them all. It was a quiet evening in December 2009. The kind of evening where the air feels colder than usual and the silence settles heavier than it should. Jennifer had made Harold his favorite dinner: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a glass of sweet iced tea. After the kids were tucked in and the dishes were done, she joined him on the porch, as she often did. A light blanket rested on her lap. The two sat there listening to the soft hum of crickets and the occasional breeze rustling the trees. Harold, as always, was reserved. He didn't speak much. But tonight something in him was softer, almost vulnerable. He looked older than usual, tired. Jennifer noticed. Without a word, she rose from her chair, walked over to him, and gently draped the blanket over his shoulders. Their hands brushed, and for a second, just a second, their eyes met. There was nothing said, no confession, no intention. But something passed between them, a flicker, a spark. And though they quickly looked away, both of them felt it. Something unspoken, something that shouldn't have been there, but was. In the weeks that followed, they pretended nothing had changed. Jennifer continued her role as the caring daughter-in-law, and Harold kept his distance. But inside, they were both unraveling. Jennifer began to catch herself, noticing Harold in ways she never had. His laugh, the way he held his coffee cup, the way he spoke about his late wife with such longing. She told herself it was nothing, just empathy, just grief. But it wasn't. Harold, meanwhile, was fighting a war of his own. He had spent his entire life drawing lines between right and wrong. It was what being a cop had taught him. But those lines were blurring. He knew the rules. He knew this was forbidden. But he also knew how lonely he felt. How long it had been since anyone had truly seen him, listened to him, cared. And the truth was, Jennifer did all those things. Then in the spring of 2010, the line they had both tiptoed around for months disappeared. Mark had gone on a business trip. The kids were asleep. Harold stayed late helping Jennifer fix a leaky faucet. As they stood close in the kitchen, hands wet, laughter fading, he leaned in and kissed her. She pulled away, stunned, but not angry. And though they didn't speak of it, the damage was done. A door had opened, and what walked through it wasn't love. It was temptation and betrayal, and the beginning of the end. After that night in the kitchen, there was no going back. For days, Jennifer avoided Harold, not out of anger, but out of fear. Fear of what the kiss meant, fear of what it awoke inside her, fear of what she was becoming. Harold, too, kept his distance. He didn't call, didn't visit. But when their paths inevitably crossed again, during a family dinner, a school event, a quiet moment alone, the silence between them wasn't just awkward, it was electric. By the summer of 2010, resistance gave way to impulse, and impulse gave way to something far more dangerous. They met in secret. First at Harold's home when Mark was out of town. Then, as their fear of discovery grew, they found more discreet places. Quiet parks, parking lots, and eventually a cheap motel on the edge of Jacksonville. A place where no one knew them, where fake names and cash payments kept their secret alive. Each meeting was a risk. Every text, every glance, every stolen moment, a gamble that could destroy everything they had built. And yet, they couldn't stop. For Harold, the affair was a second chance at feeling alive. After years of numbing pain, he felt wanted again, needed, seen. For Jennifer, it was an escape from loneliness, from neglect, from the slow emotional erosion of a marriage that had lost its warmth. They knew it was wrong, but wrong in the quiet spaces between them began to feel like home. The affair wasn't passionate in the way stories make it seem. It was messy, desperate, guilt-laced, full of whispered regrets and silent goodbyes that never lasted. And through it all, life went on. Jennifer continued playing the part of the perfect wife. Soccer games, birthday parties, dinner on the table at 6. Mark, oblivious, continued burying himself in work. Real estate deals, phone calls, open houses, all while his marriage decayed beneath him. For years, the secret stayed buried. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and the more they tried to hide, the more visible the cracks became. Jennifer grew more withdrawn, distracted, always checking her phone, always making excuses to leave the house. Harold became more distant from his son. Their once warm relationship replaced by awkward silences and empty conversations. And Mark, though still unaware of the truth, began to feel it. A shift, a change. Something was wrong. He didn't know what, he didn't know how, but he could feel it. The silence between them was no longer peaceful. It was the calm before a storm. For months, Mark Matthews tried to silence the voice in his head. He chalked up the distance to stress. The late-night errands, the guarded phone calls, the sudden changes in mood. He blamed it all on the pressure of raising kids, the grind of everyday life. But doubt is like a slow leak in the mind. No matter how tightly you seal it, it finds a way in. Jennifer was different. Not entirely, just off. Her eyes lingered too long on her phone. Her laughter felt forced. She'd leave the room to take calls and come back flustered, distracted. When Mark walked into a room, she'd quickly put her phone away. Still, he didn't confront her. He wasn't that kind of man. He didn't want to believe the worst. Until one afternoon when the truth came knocking, quietly, unexpectedly. It was a Saturday. Jennifer was in the backyard playing with the kids. Mark was inside looking for some cash to pay the lawn guy. Jennifer had left her purse on the kitchen counter, wide open, nothing to hide, or so she thought. As Mark reached inside, his fingers brushed against something cold, metallic, familiar yet foreign. He pulled it out slowly, a key, but not just any key. It was small, worn, old-fashioned, not from their house, not for a car, not for any place he recognized. His pulse quickened, his breath caught. The walls around him seemed to shrink. Why would Jennifer have a key like this? He didn't ask her, not yet. Instead, he slipped the key into his pockets and slipped into a new version of himself. One who needed answers, one who couldn't afford to trust blind love anymore. That night, dinner was quiet. The kids chattered about cartoons and school. Jennifer laughed at their stories. Mark smiled, nodded, but said little. Inside, he was unraveling. The next day, while Jennifer was out running errands, Mark drove across town to a locksmith. The man behind the counter was old, experienced. He examined the key carefully, turning it over in his weathered hands. "This isn't new," he said. "Definitely not residential. Looks like something for a motel, an older one." A motel key. The words echoed in Mark's head like a gunshot. Something broke inside him that day. Something sacred. Something called trust. And while he didn't yet know the full truth, he knew this much. His wife was hiding something, and he was going to find out exactly what it was. No matter where it led. The key had opened more than just a door. It had opened a wound, one that Mark Matthews could no longer ignore. He didn't confront Jennifer right away. Instead, he watched her closely. He paid attention to every movement, every word, every glance at her phone. He started to notice things he had once brushed aside. The quick excuses to leave the house, the unexplained absences, the faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers. Or maybe hadn't been for him in a long time. And then came the photographs. A week after visiting the locksmith, Mark made the decision that would change everything. He hired a private investigator. His name was Tom Grayson, a former cop with sharp instincts and an even sharper eye for secrets. Mark didn't tell anyone, not even his closest friends. He just wanted the truth, and the truth came fast. 2 weeks later, Tom handed Mark an envelope. Thick, sealed, heavy with reality. Inside were the answers Mark had feared all along. Jennifer and Harold, together, in front of the motel, smiling, kissing, entering the room under fake names, his wife and his father. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a complete dismantling of everything Mark thought his life stood for. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the photos again and again, trying to make sense of it, trying to feel something other than rage. The next evening, May 2nd, 2014, the moment arrived. The house was quiet. The children were asleep. Dinner had been eaten in near silence. Mark sat on the living room couch, the envelope of photos in his hand, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He called Jennifer in. She came without hesitation, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Her smile faded when she saw his face. Without a word, Mark tossed the photos onto the coffee table. They slid across the surface, fanning out like a crime scene. Jennifer froze. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened as she slowly lowered herself onto the couch across from him. "Explain," Mark said. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that's far more dangerous than shouting. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but there were no excuses strong enough for what he already knew. She confessed, through sobs, through stammered apologies. She begged for forgiveness. She swore it was a mistake. She said it had started with grief, that she hadn't meant for it to go this far. But Mark was done listening. Without another word, he stood, walked out the door, and disappeared into the night, leaving Jennifer alone, surrounded by silence and the weight of what she had done. After the confrontation, Mark Matthews didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't destroy furniture. He didn't threaten to leave, no. Mark went silent. And that silence was far more dangerous. For days, he said little. He ate in silence, slept restlessly, worked like a machine. From the outside, life in the Matthews household appeared almost normal. But inside Mark's mind, something dark was taking root. Betrayal has a way of rewiring a man, especially betrayal like this, from the two people he trusted most, his wife, his father. The photographs haunted him. The motel key he had once found now felt like a loaded weapon in his pocket, a constant reminder that the life he thought he was living had been a lie. Jennifer tried to hold it together. She kept up appearances for the children. She cooked dinner, went through the routines, but Mark's silence was crushing. And then, it got worse. He began to follow her, quietly, carefully, not with his eyes anymore, but with help. Mark hired Tom Grayson again. This time, not to discover the affair, but to document everything that followed. Where Jennifer went, who she saw, how often she and Harold met. And the reports kept coming back the same. Despite the confrontations, they hadn't stopped. May passed in a haze of mounting rage. Jennifer insisted it was over. But Mark knew better. On the outside, he was calm, but inside, he was already planning. Every betrayal has a breaking point, and Mark's came in the form of a gun. On June 5th, 2014, he drove to the edge of town, a place far from the suburbs where the rules didn't matter and no one asked questions. There he met a man introduced by a friend of a friend. No names, no stories, just a quick exchange of cash and steel. A handgun, unregistered, untraceable. Mark wrapped it in an old towel and placed it in a locked box in the garage, beneath piles of unused tools and dusty holiday decorations. A place no one would think to look. And each night as the kids went to bed and Jennifer stared at the TV like everything was okay, he rehearsed, in his head over and over, how he'd do it, when, what he'd say, or wouldn't. It wasn't rage anymore, it was precision, cold, methodical. Because Mark wasn't planning an outburst, he was planning an execution, and in just under 2 weeks, he would follow through. June 18th, 2014. It was a Wednesday like any other in Jacksonville. Humid, quiet, unremarkable. But for Mark Matthews, it was the day he had waited for. He'd been watching Harold for weeks, studying his schedule, his patterns, his habits. And tonight, Harold would be home, alone. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the suburban streets, Mark retrieved the gun from its hiding place in the garage. He wore gloves, dark clothing, no phone, no watch, nothing that could place him anywhere near what was about to happen. The weapon felt heavier than he expected. Not physically, but morally. Yet his hands didn't shake, not anymore. He parked 3 houses away from Harold's. Far enough to avoid suspicion, but close enough to walk. The neighborhood was still. A light breeze rustled the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once. Then silence. Mark approached the house with purpose. He had memorized every step, every angle, every creaking board on the porch. In his pocket was a key, the same spare Harold had given him years ago, back when they were still father and son. The irony stung, but only for a moment. He slipped inside like a ghost. No alarms, no lights flicked on, no voices called out, just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of pages turning. Harold was in the living room, reading, relaxed, completely unaware of what was coming. When he looked up, it took him a split second to register what was happening. "Mark?" That was all he had time to say. Mark didn't answer. He raised the gun and fired twice. The first shot struck Harold in the chest, the second through the heart. The older man collapsed back into his chair, the book falling from his hands, blood staining the floor like spilled ink. And then silence. Mark stood still for a moment, frozen in the gravity of what he had just done. His face was blank, not triumphant, not emotional, just hollow. He moved quickly after that, wiped the gun clean, placed it in Harold's lifeless hand, kicked over a lamp, opened a drawer, staged the scene. A fake robbery, a struggle gone wrong, a clean exit. As he walked away, back into the night, Mark didn't look back. He had told himself it was justice, that Harold had destroyed his life, that Jennifer had pushed him to this. But as the shadows swallowed him whole, one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it wasn't justice. It was murder. The morning of June 19th, 2014 began like any other. Jennifer Matthews stood in the kitchen scrambling eggs while the kids laughed over cereal. The sun filtered through the window, and for a brief moment, just a moment, life seemed normal. Until the knock on the door. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't loud, just firm. She opened it to find two uniformed officers standing solemnly on her front step. The expressions on their faces told her everything before a word was spoken. "Mrs. Matthews," one of them said softly, "I'm afraid we have some bad news." She didn't hear the rest, just fragments. "Harold Matthews, found this morning, gunshot wounds, possible robbery gone wrong." Her knees buckled. The officer reached out to steady her as her world began to spin. Her voice cracked, her hands shook. And though the officers tried to calm her, the damage was done. Harold was dead. And whatever twisted, complicated emotions she still carried for him, love, guilt, regret, collapsed into grief. Police began their investigation immediately. At first glance, it did look like a break-in. A few items were overturned. The gun found near Harold's body was wiped clean, his fingerprints carefully placed. But not everyone bought the story. Lead Detective John Harris had known Harold personally. They had served together on the force. He knew Harold wasn't careless, wasn't vulnerable. And if this truly had been a robbery, it didn't make sense. There was no forced entry, no sign of struggle, and nothing had been stolen. Something was wrong. As the forensics team combed through the house, their suspicions grew. Then came the first real clue, a hidden folder tucked inside Harold's personal drawer, filled with photographs. Jennifer and Harold, together, at a motel, kissing, holding hands, looking far too familiar. It didn't take long to trace the photos back to a private investigator. The same investigator Mark had hired. Suddenly, the random robbery theory collapsed like a house of cards. Detectives brought Mark in for questioning. He was composed, too composed. He claimed he'd been home alone the night of the murder. No alibi, no phone records, no witnesses. When they searched his garage, they found a pair of gloves hidden behind old boxes, cleaned, but not clean enough. Traces of gunpowder lingered on the fibers. It was small, but it was enough. The walls were closing in, and soon the truth, the whole truth, would be impossible to escape. July 3rd, 2014. Just 2 weeks after Harold Matthews was gunned down in his own living room, the Jacksonville Police Department made their move. Mark Matthews, husband, father, businessman, was arrested outside his office. He didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded, as if he had been waiting for it all along. The evidence was damning. No alibi. Gunpowder residue on the gloves. A motive as old as time. Betrayal, humiliation, revenge. During interrogation, Mark held out at first, but the detectives were patient, methodical. They broke down his story, piece by piece. Every inconsistency chipped away at the carefully constructed version of events he had clung to. Eventually, the weight of the truth crushed the man beneath it. Mark didn't confess in a dramatic outburst. There were no tears, no remorse-filled monologue. He simply looked down and said, "He took everything from me." The trial began on August 15th. The courtroom was packed. Jennifer sat quietly in the back, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She had filed for divorce shortly after Mark's arrest. Her reputation was in ruins. The affair, once hidden in the shadows and now splashed across headlines, court transcripts, and news tickers. But this trial wasn't about her. It was about him. The prosecution presented a clear, chilling case. A man betrayed by his wife and father. A calculated plan fueled by rage. A murder staged to look like a robbery. The photographs. The motel key. The gloves with residue. The lack of forced entry. Every piece fit like a puzzle. Every question led back to Mark. The defense tried to paint a different picture of a man driven to insanity by betrayal, a crime of passion, not premeditation. But the jury wasn't swayed. Mark hadn't snapped in the heat of the moment. He had planned, prepared, executed. On September 10, 2014, the verdict was read. Guilty, first-degree murder, life in prison, no parole. Mark showed no emotion as the sentence was handed down. No outburst, no protest, just silence. The same silence he'd kept since the night he pulled the trigger. And as he was led away in cuffs, the man who once stood at the center of a perfect family vanished into the system. Jennifer left Jacksonville with her 2 children shortly after the trial ended. She sought a new life in a new town, but the past followed her like a shadow. The affair, the murder, the trial, a tangled web of lies that ended in blood and left everyone broken. This wasn't just a story about infidelity. It wasn't just about murder. It was about the slow, devastating erosion of trust. One secret, one kiss, one key. That's all it took to start a chain reaction that ended in blood, prison bars, and a family torn beyond repair. People often ask, how could something like this happen? What kind of man kills his father? What kind of woman betrays her husband like that? But those questions, though simple, never have simple answers. Because the truth is, stories like these don't explode overnight. They unravel slowly, silently, behind closed doors. Jennifer didn't set out to destroy her family. Harold didn't plan to betray his son. Mark never imagined himself pulling a trigger. And yet, they all made choices. Small, selfish, silent choices. Ones that seemed harmless in the moment. But over time, they stacked on top of one another until they crushed everything beneath them. This story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the darkest parts of human nature don't always come from strangers or criminals or villains in the shadows. Sometimes they come from within, from people we love, from the faces we trust, from the parts of ourselves we pretend don't exist. Harold was grieving. Jennifer was lonely. Mark was shattered. But pain doesn't excuse betrayal, and betrayal doesn't justify murder. In the end, no one won. A respected father, dead. A husband, imprisoned for life. A wife, left with nothing but guilt and memories. 2 children, forced to grow up without either parent. All because 3 adults couldn't face their truths or resist their temptations. So what can we take from this? Maybe it's this: that secrets always surface, that hurt people, and that if you don't confront the cracks in your life early, one day they'll become the fault lines that split your world in 2. Betrayal doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it sleeps next to you. Sometimes it sits across the dinner table. Sometimes it shares your last name.